It's really exciting to advocate for something you truly believe in, which is why I'm so thrilled that Bandwidth Conversations is being sponsored by Clearer this year. Clearer has genuinely revitalized my skin. This isn't another cream on the shelf. Clearer is bespoke, evidence-based skincare created by consultant dermatologist Dr. Emma Craythorne, one of the leaders in her field. Emma's founding product, the Clearer Special, is a personalized night treatment that brings together multiple advanced actives, many of which you can't get over the counter, into one luxurious cream. And here's the thing. I've tried countless products over the years, all promising miracles. None worked. Then I started using Clearer, and within a month, friends were saying, "What have you done? Your skin looks amazing." And even I was doing double takes in the mirror. I looked fresher, younger, and glowing. And it's not just me saying this. Vogue, Elle, and Cosmopolitan all rave about Clearer. So if you want to find out more, head to clearer.skin. That's Klira.skin. If you want to find out more about Clearer founder, Dr. Emma Craythorne, listen to my podcast with her, as her story is fascinating and her credentials are mind-blowingly impressive. Plus, Bandwidth Conversations listeners get 20% off the Clearer Special for the first 3 months on quarterly and annual plans. Just use the code bandwidth20. It is a game changer. Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers, and rock stars of life. My guest today is a multi-award-winning musician, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, producer, composer, and DJ. His musicianship and compositions embrace the entire universe of music, from jazz to flamenco to world to electronica. He has written, performed, and played with the likes of the London Symphony Orchestra, Sir Paul McCartney, and Sting. The fruits of his labours range from writing solo albums, collaborating with musical royalty, to writing scores for Hollywood blockbuster films. He's been awarded a CBE for his services to music, and in fact he's received so many awards and accolades that Wikipedia has had to list them by year. He was also part of a comedy duo, and all this came after training as a lawyer and an accountant. I'm really looking forward to hearing about all the threads of his life that have led him to be the music icon he is today. Thanks to my dear friend, Monica Kelleher, who met him at a dinner and put us in touch. I am thrilled, really thrilled, to be talking today to Nitin Sawhney. Thank you so much for being here.
That was a very kind introduction. Thank you very much.
Normally, we start at the guest's upbringing, but I wanted to go a little bit further back because, and please correct my pronunciation, but your mother was from the Brahmin caste, which is the highest caste, and your father was from the Kshatriya caste,
Yeah, that's right.
which is the warrior caste. It was a love match. Their marriage wasn't arranged, which very much defied social pressures. How much resistance did they encounter?
Oh, well, they didn't so much, partially because my dad was a lecturer. I think he actually lectured my mum. He was a botany lecturer, although he became a chemical engineer later on. But he lectured her. They got on very well and they ended up together. The families approved of each other, so it wasn't a crazy thing. But it was quite unusual at the time for different castes to marry in that way. I don't think there was any family disapproval, but I think it was more of a social thing.
Okay. Which sounds very wildly romantic.
I think it was. It's been difficult. I mean, since my dad passed away in 2013, my mum, I think she's felt quite lost, if I'm really honest. She was with him from the age of 17. He was 9 years older than her, so she's 89 now. It's been difficult for her. It's a huge upheaval when anyone loses a partner, let alone a husband who's been with you for that length of time.
Yes. They moved to the UK before you were born.
That's right.
And your father then was a chemical engineer when he was here. And your mother sounds as if she was very creative.
She was. She was a Bharatanatyam dancer, but she also studied psychology. She did a psychology degree in 3 months because she is very clever. But it was very difficult because she wanted to come to the UK, but she really wanted a degree before she came. And my dad had already moved here. From what I recall, or it might have been, I may be getting that mixed up, but she wanted to move to be with him. But at the same time, she wanted a degree beforehand. So I think when she was 17 or 18, she did a degree in 3 months. What she did was she asked through her father, through my grandfather, if he could ask the university, I think it was the Punjab University if they would allow her to sit the psychology degree finals in 3 months if she just studied on her own. And they did, and she passed and she got a degree in psychology in 3 months.
That's incredible.
Yeah, which is amazing. So I think when they came to the UK, I mean, it was interesting because she started off as an English teacher. But I think when I was born, with the pressure of raising 3 children, because there was quite a lot of homework to do and marking and all that stuff. So she ended up working on a post office counter in Rochester, and then she moved around between Rochester, Strood and Chatham, yeah.
What was your first musical memory?
My first musical memories were of my mum singing, because she had a beautiful voice and she would sing lots of different old Indian melodies and songs. She just seemed to have an encyclopedic knowledge, but then maybe that's me being quite nostalgic and sentimental and thinking that she did. But I'm pretty sure she knew a lot of songs, and also she's quite religious. We're from a Hindi background, so she knew a lot of old Indian shlokas and different ancient songs. So she would sing some of those when I was very young, and I thought those sounded beautiful. So that was my earliest experience. But also, I think I was always surrounded by music because my mum and dad always played music in the house, and my brothers were big fans of rock music. So I grew up listening to a lot of that.
What stage did it look as if you might be quite good at it?
First of all, we had to get a piano. So when I was about 4, when we got a piano, I started studying classical piano from the age of 5. Actually, it was interesting because my middle brother, Swapan,
Are you the youngest?
I'm the youngest, so there's 3 of us. So the one in the middle, who's 5 years older than me, Swapan, he played the guitar and he played the piano, but he started by playing the piano, and so did my eldest brother. And they would pick out tunes with one finger, and then when I was 4, I'd follow what they were doing, and then I started playing, and then I'd start elaborating on those. And then when I had classical lessons, I really loved it. So I practiced a lot and I got through all the grades pretty quickly. That was a fantastic foundation for everything else.
You were playing sitar and tabla as well?
I did, but quite a bit later. I studied guitar first. Well, I didn't study it formally until a bit later. I started playing when I was 8, but then I was playing a lot of blues and rock guitar and folk guitar and just listening to a lot of guitarists. I loved the sound of the guitar, but I could translate what I was figuring out on the piano to the guitar, because once you map it out in your mind, you're able to see the same patterns in the fretboard of a guitar as you can see on the keyboard. So I'd find it interesting looking for patterns and seeing how everything tied together. And then I'd start practicing scales in the guitar and so on. And then I got into flamenco guitar. And because I was improvising a lot on the piano, because I used to play Bach 2-part inventions, and I used to love playing around with them. And then I used to listen to Oscar Peterson, actually, as a fantastic pianist. So and then that got me into also Bill Evans, because my dad used to play Miles Davis, and I remember buying A Kind of Blue when I was very young. So I got into jazz harmony and so on and just started mucking around with it. And then in my teens, I ended up joining just about every kind of band going. So I was in a jazz quartet. I'd play with youth orchestras. I'd play with a punk band, a funk band. I was in AC/DC and Van Halen covers bands, all kinds of things.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so I'd play lots of rock guitar and all kinds of things. I'd have to play Eruption from Van Halen, things like that. So it was kind of, I was mad about the guitar, mad about the piano. For me, music was everything. And I think it was actually also a place of sanctuary and a place of meditation and exploration and discovery.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, and you may not want to, and that's absolutely fine if you would choose not to, but on Desert Island Discs, you mentioned that you really suffered in school and out of school. And in school, at the age of 11, you were banned from music for 6 years.
Yeah, that did happen, yeah.
Why was that?
It's a difficult thing to talk about. The school was very kind to me a few years ago. When I say a few years ago, about 15 years ago, they invited me to the school and they were very kind and actually apologised to me for some of the things that happened when I was there, which was incredibly gracious of them. But without talking about individuals or whatever, it was just a difficult time because the problem was, it was more of an endemic situation to the area. I was born in the 60s, in 1964, and then I was growing up in Rochester in Kent, and the National Front were very prominent at that time. And there were lots
height,
of
weren't they
skinheads,
then?
yeah, seeing us resurfacing of that kind of mentality now, unfortunately. But It was the rise of the National Front, right-wing, crazy racism, and it was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. I couldn't really escape it. I was pretty much the only Asian in the school. My brother was 5 years older than me, so he was in the sixth form, and I was just coming into the school.
Was this the Joseph Williamson's mathematical school?
Yeah, which was a very good school and still is. A lot of people from there went to Oxford and Cambridge, and it was a great school, and I did well from there and so on. But like I said, I think that racism infiltrated everywhere. And I wouldn't isolate it to being about that school or anything like that. It was actually about the area and the mentality. I mean, at that point, the National Front were getting more votes than the Liberal Party. Now we've got Reform. I mean, I'm sorry, but I have to make that comparison because Farage's background is no different to a lot of the sorts of people who were in the National Front. So I find it quite disturbing when I see all of this resurfacing again. But yeah, I saw a lot of that when I was young. And it's, in a way, it informs a lot of how I think now. And it's tiring and exhausting to see that we've come back to that kind of mentality and people are falling for the same crap again.
Yeah. Could you just give us an example of what you were facing going to and from school every day?
Oh, yeah, I was followed by people in a white van who would shout racist abuse at me as I was walking down the street. I was physically assaulted a great deal.
You must have been afraid a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, I got to the point where it happened so frequently that it numbed me. I got to the point where I just accepted that that was what happened. I remember people waiting for me when I'd be walking home from school at a particular bus stop, attacking me every time I walked past. Then I'd try another route, and that's when the white van would be there. So I couldn't really get away from it. It was everywhere. And it was in school, in the playgrounds, at lunchtime.
So what would you do? Would you just try and hide somewhere? I remember being bullied at school and hiding in the loos.
Yeah, I did that. But then I remember somebody kicking the loo door down to get to me. It was a crazy time.
Being banned from music, why was that?
Specifically, it was because I used to go into the practice rooms and I used to practice more often than not. I'd practice some of the classical pieces that I knew. But one time I was in there and I happened to be playing an Indian classical rag that I'd been shown by my uncle. And I was playing around with it on the piano, which I think was probably Rag Bhairavi, which is like a Phrygian mode for anyone who understands Western classical music. But it's more than that. It's more elaborate than that. And I was playing around with it, and music teacher came in and said, "What are you doing in here?" And I said, "I'm playing this." And he said, "Well, where's your sheet music?" And I said, "Well, you don't have it for this. It's an oral tradition. You don't have it for that." He said, "Well, if you don't have sheet music, it's not music. Get out." And then he made a point of banning me for many years afterwards. Again, I'm not going to go into who that person was. It was just a crazy time.
Yeah, that is crazy. And what an idiot. This is understatement. But once in a while, it's like the Billy Elliot effect. Once in a while, you come across someone who's really, really talented, and he could have been a mentor as opposed to an obstacle.
Interestingly, many years later, that same person asked me if I would play, because he didn't have anyone else who could sight read music on the guitar. So he asked me if I would be in, I think it was The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And it was a school opera. And Mike Oldfield, I think, wrote it. There was a guitar part for it. He had to come cap in hand when I was in the sixth form. It's all so long ago.
Thank you for talking about it, because I think there are rumblings now, or more than rumblings. And I think it's really important, just in case there was someone who was listening who might be feeling that way inclined.
I mean, education is everything. It's so important that children feel that they are at liberty to express themselves and explore their creativity and explore their own minds without being hindered by people who call themselves teachers or are supposed to be there to protect them. So I do feel passionately about that. And I'm a patron of artists, which actually works with very young children and explores their creativity. And I work with the Abraham Wilson Foundation, and I've worked with the PRS Foundation. It's all about really helping young people to get a foothold in the music industry and also to explore their creativity in whatever way they want. I feel very passionately about that.
Well, you leave that school, goodness, you go to Liverpool University to study law, and then you switch to
accountancy, because my brother had said to me, because my brother was a chartered accountant, he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I want to be a musician. He said, well, why are you doing this? And I said, just to have that as a backup. And he said, well, if you're thinking of it just as a backup, it's probably better if you do accountancy because it's easier to get work. you can always get work freelancing. I said, okay. So I did that. And it was odd because I did it quite robotically. I mean, I was always playing with bands and doing gigs and performing and practicing. For me, everything else was just stuff that I did just because that's what you're supposed to do. So I ended up as a financial controller of a hotel, of all things. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then James Taylor, who I went to school with, so he had a band called the James Taylor Quartet.
Yeah. Not James Taylor,
not that
You've
one.
Got a Friend.
Yeah, I'm not that old. Quite. But yeah, so I went to school with James, and then he said, do you want to come on tour with us? Interestingly, I did a gig with him just a few months ago at the Barbican.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, after all these years. And there were people there that I hadn't properly chatted with for about 50 years. We first met when we were 11, so it was a very long time ago. But it was great, and it was great going off, with James and touring. And it was quite mad because the James Taylor Quartet were very popular at that time. They were spearheading the acid jazz movement, and we were playing at Dingwall's Sunday lunchtimes and playing the Forum, which was the town and country club at the time. It was great touring with a proper band. I'd never experienced anything like that, and it gave me the taste for it.
Yeah, well, I love the Starsky and Hutch James Taylor Quartet version of that. It's just
I used to play that every night. Yeah.
Oh my
so
goodness.
we do that, and actually, what was funny was James would send me out onto the stage first, and I'd start playing the wild pedal guitar part for Starsky and Hutch, and then the rest of the band would join me, and it'd build up the track. But it was quite funny because I was quite shy, so suddenly I was going on stage on my own, starting the gig, which again was an initiation by fire kind of thing. That was great, actually. Enjoyed it.
And before that, if I take you back a little bit, because when you were at, and I don't know whether it was which university, but I think it was at Hertfordshire.
I met Sanj.
That you met, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
You met Sanji Bhaskar.
Yeah.
The two of you formed the musical duo, which I think you started out as
was more of a
Bargee Boys,
comedy.
and then
that's right.
And then you turned into Secret Asians, and then that also developed into Goodness Gracious Me on the radio and then on television. Right. So how did that whole different piece?
Yeah, I mean, that
happen?
was the kind of. So I've worn many hats in my life. So with Sanj, we got on very well pretty much from day one, and we clicked, and there was a review, actually. It was, if you recall, at that time, I think this must have been about 1983, 84, I can't remember, but Live Aid was happening or had happened. So we put this thing together with a few of us called Lemonade. We just did this review show, and we just clicked from there, and then we started doing comedy together. Just literally to entertain ourselves, just doing stupid things, just clowning around in the student union bar, and people used to enjoy it. And because there was no pressure, it was just us clowning around at the union bar. We actually became quite slick at some things. And then we stopped doing it when we left university. And then years later, I saw some comedy and I just thought, oh, we used to do that. And I called up Sanj and we said, yeah, let's try and do something again. So we did. And then we just toured up and down the country for a bit. And then at the Oval House, what happened was that initially we had about 3 people come and see us. So we did this review night there and we asked if we could do it. We asked if we could take the place for 2 weeks, and they were very, very worried when hardly anyone was there. I mean, it was just a bit more than 3 people. It was probably about 15 people or something on the first night.
I think that's even more brave than playing music, because comedy, they take no prisoners. If they're not happy with you, then you know.
Yeah, this was the thing. But what was great was the second night, I think, Bonnie Greer came to see it, and she reviewed it for Time Out and said it was the coolest show she'd seen in London. And suddenly we had queues down the road. And that's when it all took off. And it never went back from that, because basically then it was a roller coaster. And it was too much for me. I wasn't expecting, because for me, it was always about having fun with some friends or with Sanj. And then it was some more friends, because then Anil Gupta and Sharat Sardana from the BBC came and saw it and said, do you want your own show on the radio, maybe even TV? And we said, great. And then Meera Syal joined us, who's now Sanj's wife. And Nina Wadia had done a couple of things with us. So she joined us, and then Corvin the Gear. And so it was us. I did 2 series of the radio show, I think, for Radio 4. I was offered to produce somebody called Amar for Warner Music. And so I had to choose, really. And I went, no, I'm not a comedian. I mean, I enjoyed it and I was okay at doing it, but I felt like I was always a musician.
Wanted to go back to music. I was looking through YouTube and I thought it was you, but I couldn't be 100% sure. But
Let's go for an English.
Go for an English, exactly.
Yes, that's me burping and doing a moonie at the end.
Right.
Yeah, that's right, with a crazy haircut. It was fun. I did a lot more sketches, but then when I left, because I left literally after the pilot, so they cut out a lot of the stuff I'd done, which I was fine with. And Anil's still a good friend. I see him every now and then. Sanj and I are eternally talking about reforming and doing something just as a one-off for a laugh. But I mean, it was interesting as well because years later with Akram Khan, who's a fantastic choreographer at Sadler's Wells, we put together a two-man show with dancers, but it was essentially about our connection and relationship. And I realized that all that experience with Sanj really enabled me to work with someone like Akram. Akram's one of the most brilliant choreographers in the world today, I think. But it was fascinating getting into doing all kinds of skits and sketches and then going into music and choreography. It felt quite seamless. We performed it around the world and that was great. And I think that came from that time working comedy.
Then it was James Taylor. And since then, you've released more than 20 studio albums.
Yeah, although they're not all solo albums.
Okay.
That might include some compilations and soundtrack albums. Probably quite a lot more than 20, I think.
Okay, you've received 17 major national awards for your album
more now,
work.
I think.
More,
Yeah.
okay. And you're a recipient of the Ivor Novello Lifetime Achievement Award. Your first album, Spirit Dance, was released in 1993. When I interviewed Chris Difford from Squeeze, he said that it took Squeeze 7 years of touring around, playing in pubs to people who didn't want to listen to them before they got their break. How would you describe your early years as a musician?
What's interesting, because Chris Difford, I remember going to a writing camp with Chris Difford that he had at his house.
Well, yes, he does them quite regularly now, doesn't he?
I did one in, I think, the 90s. No, it was the early 2000s, because I remember Turin Breaks were there. And he's a lovely guy, actually, Chris Difford. In the 90s, after Spirit Dance, what happened was that Outcast Records heard that album. There was a lot that came from that album. I did it with an Arts Council grant. It's the only time I ever took a grant to make music for myself because there was no other way in. I didn't really know how to get any record companies even vaguely interested in what I was doing. So I just did my own thing. And then suddenly there was a lot of interest, suddenly on television, and Outcast Records wanted to sign me. And then Alex Pillow, who was a director for the BBC at the time, asked if he could use one of the tracks from that album for a particular scene in this film called Flight, which is the first time I encountered Mira Cial, I think, because she was actually in the film.
So it happened pretty immediately then, really?
Yeah. I mean, I'd already been working in theatre. I'd worked as a music director for theatre at Stratford East and also with Tara Arts, and I was into theatre anyway. So what this triggered was, I mean, it was crazy. At that time for Flight, what happened was that which is the first film I scored for the BBC, because Alex asked me if I would have a go at scoring it. So I'd have a VHS recorder and a sampler with a keyboard, and I'd literally be trying to synchronize the two, literally. So I'd go, okay, I've recorded this bit now and let me see if I can. So it was bonkers trying to get everything to synchronize. And I remember the technical challenges of doing all that were almost superseding the musical aspects of it. The musical I found fairly straightforward. It was just, how do I write a film score and make it work for what they need? But it was a great learning experience. And over time, I got asked more and more. It never really stopped since then, to be honest. I mean, I was constantly being asked to write film scores. What was wonderful was that all gave me an opportunity just from that album, Spirit Dance, which I took 5 days to record. I didn't have a budget to spend any more time in the studio.
It's amazing because, I mean, I've listened to it and it's polished to me.
Well, that's very kind of you.
It sounds like months, year-long project. So you did 5 days in a recording studio.
Yeah. And I felt really self-indulgent with the next one, Migration, because that took 2 weeks. But I mean, that album, so much happened. It wasn't like I became well-known or anything from those albums, but it just started to build. I mean, I went from gradually during that period, I went from playing to audiences of, say, 75. But it also helped doing the comedy thing. So people would be seeing me doing that. So that happened in the mid-90s. So my name started to get around in different ways, particularly around the Asian community. And then there was this whole thing called Asian Underground. So there was a lot more interest. And then Talvin in 1999 won the Mercury Prize. But before that, Asian Dove Foundation had come out, and there was Corner Shop, there was Asian Dove Foundation, Fundamental, Black Star Liner, Bad Marsh and Shri, all these bands that were coming out. And I was DJing as well at the end, and Allmans. Suddenly it was a very cool, hip thing. Bjork was coming down with Goldie, and they were coming down to watch us DJ. And there was a whole group of us doing that. And The Face said it was the coolest club in London at that time. So it
really
became very
exciting.
fashionable. And suddenly I'd gone from being in one fashionable movement with the James Taylor Quartet to being in another fashionable movement with the whole Asian comedy thing, where it seemed to be very cool for a while. And then the Asian Underground thing was simultaneously coming up, and that was suddenly very cool in the clubs. And I went from 75 people at the Jazz Cafe to selling out the Royal Albert Hall, 5,000 people
my
in a
gosh.
very short time.
Was that 5 years later?
Beyond Skin was the breakthrough thing. And I'd spent 2 years in my bedroom basically just making this album, and with no sense of anyone or anything. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, apart from Outkast had said they wanted it. So I thought, well, I'll give it to them when I finish. I just need to make it. I think I was in semi-depression, if I'm really honest, because I'm trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted. And I found the music industry quite tiring and exhausting. And I just thought, I don't know what I'm doing really, or who I am at the moment. And so Beyond Skin was me trying to figure that out. The whole of that album, I talked about this a few times, but it's bookended with the Indian Prime Minister of that time, Vajpayee, talking about testing nuclear bombs in the Pokhran Range. And at the end, I used Oppenheimer, literally his voice, quoting from the Bhagavad Gita. And I'd always been interested in physics and theology and philosophy. And so a lot of these things started feeding into what I was doing, even in lyrics that I was writing or in the ideas I was coming up with. But it just formed. And really, it was a collage approach to making an album that I hadn't ever heard anyone do, actually. I would incorporate recordings of my mum and dad speaking. I want it to be a scrapbook creation that was built around my journey and feelings internally, but also my perspective on history and how my parents ended up. It wasn't so literal. It was trying to figure that out.
Sometimes you can see these things in hindsight, but at the time when you're immersed in it, you just don't really know.
Yeah.
You're just writing stuff.
It has a very strong subliminal narrative.
Yes, and you can hear it when you listen to it.
I knew that was coming through. I just didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to do it.
And did that feel cathartic then? If you were
Extremely. The most cathartic thing I've ever done was make Beyond Skin, by far. Because like I said, I was in a room for a couple of years, and it was also trying to come to terms with all that racism that I'd experienced when I was young. It was a very psychodynamically based album in a lot of ways, and dealing with a lot of trauma, if I'm really honest, and stuff that I didn't really recognize as that, which I have since, because I was in therapy for 12 years. I can see that that's what it was. I was trying to deal with a lot of stuff I hadn't.
You've buried.
Yeah. Beyond Skin was all of that.
Well, it shot up through the charts, and then your fifth album, Prophecy, did the same thing. And I actually wanted to ask you about it because I was listening. Well, I've been listening to all your music. I'm having such a lovely time in watching the films. And I mean, it's just, I've had a ball.
Oh, that's really kind of you. Thank you.
But in Prophecy, you worked with a Bollywood orchestra. You worked with street children in Brazil, Native American musicians. But I even heard in there, it sounded like a South African choir. And so for that album, did you go to those places and immerse yourself and then write when you were there, or were you in your bedroom and then went out?
I wanted to do the opposite of what I'd done with Beyond Skin. That was a very insular, private experience. Although I did bring people into my space, it was me being very self-indulgent in a lot of ways. And I thought, I want to do something which is about me engaging with the world around me and meeting the people. I feel that the media and politics hide from us, and find my own sense of truth about the world. So I was very lucky in that V2 signed me, which is the second Virgin label effectively. And there was quite a lot of money to allow me to do what I wanted. I mean, Elbow had been signed to them, Stereophonics had been signed to them. We all used to meet each other in the cafe downstairs in Holland Park. We all got on. It was amazing. They asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I'd like to travel to make this next album. And because Beyond Skin had done very well, and because it had been nominated for a Mercury.
It won actually various awards. It won the South Bank Award for popular music.
Yeah, it was great. What happened then was I was traveling around the world and meeting Nelson Mandela in his house and teaching kids in Reshaw Primary School and working with children in the street shelter, Task Brazil, going all over the place and finding people, Aboriginal Australians. That was an amazing experience.
Oh my gosh, you went all the way to
Arnhem Land.
Australia.
Yeah. It was wonderful because actually I never made decisions in the way people normally make decisions. I didn't sit down and think I need to do this or whatever. It was just, I've always really followed my intuition. I think I've always done that. That's where it took me to all these places. I didn't know what I was going to discover or what was going to emerge from all of that. But I think when you let go and allow the universe to guide you in that way, you always end up on your feet. Some things are so mind-blowing that it's very difficult for me to believe they happened.
Could you talk about one of them?
Sure. I had an experience of ayahuasca in Brazil with Sting, who took me to a place in the rainforest. I didn't know it was ayahuasca at the time. They called it vegetal.
Sounds like a spread you have put on your toast.
That's Vegemite. It's toast.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was amazing because what I experienced there, I mean, I won't go into the detail of it, was a prescient experience or a vision or whatever you want to call it. It was maybe a curtain into a different realm or reality that actually allowed me. 2 weeks later, I was in Arnhem Land with an Aboriginal elder sitting in the sacred ground where he hadn't brought anyone for 30 years. And I was sitting with him. I won't go into the detail of how I got there, but the same thing that I had seen in my vision, having taken ayahuasca, exactly played out precisely to the inch with this tribal elder who then told me that I had died there 80,000 years ago and I was his long-lost brother.
Because it's making the hairs on my arms stand up one end.
Make of that what you will, but I had crazy experiences of that level, and that wasn't isolated.
I've actually interviewed a couple of people who've taken it, and it's been unbelievably helpful. Well, 100% of the sample size of 2 that I've spoken to, but they were doing it under control. Someone was watching them. When you went, were you just...
Well, I was with Sting.
Was he watching you, or...?
Well, I mean, I passed out, but when I woke up, he pulled me up off the ground and he said, "You okay?" It was profound. I won't go into it.
No, okay.
But the whole trip, that whole journey was full of amazing experiences. And since then, before then as well, I had many experiences which were, I've talked about and sometimes do these one-man shows where I'll talk about coincidences that have happened in my life and crazy, odd experiences. And a few of those happened in the 90s, but a lot more since the ayahuasca experience. There's been a lot of crazy experiences which I can't explain. I'm very much into science, and I'm not into the idea of woo-woo science, as Brian Cox calls it.
Yeah. Yes. At the same time, an amazing album came out of it as well. So that was hugely successful. And you're gathering this huge fan base, one of whom was Madonna. She has all of your albums. There are many strings to your bows. One of those is your writing albums, your solo work. Then you also have your collaborations. I was going to ask you about Sting, actually. I think out of all the people, if I were to meet Sting, I would think I would just fall on the floor.
He's an amazing human being. I mean, one thing I would say, when we toured with him, he is the most disciplined artist I've ever come across. He'll start his day with an hour and a half or more of Ashtanga yoga at the full sequence. It's just before he'll perform or before sound check. You'll then find him reading through some lute pieces, lute suites from Bach or whatever, and he'll play through these. And then a while later, you'll see him playing chess with people, and then he'll do. I mean, he's the most un-rock and roll person you can imagine. I think he's incredibly disciplined. He's very kind. He's a very nice person. He's very welcoming to people. He doesn't have to be, and he was also very inclusive. I remember him taking me to Mangera Samba School, introducing me to a lot of people he knew there, and it was clear that he'd spent a lot of time with some of the kids there. He's not somebody who actually advertises a lot of things that he does that much, but he does do a lot. And he's a very inspiring human being. Yeah. Very nice guy.
Well, you've worked with him, you've worked with Sinead O'Connor, Sir Paul McCartney, Brian Eno, Jeff Beck. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Why was Sir Paul McCartney playing Yesterday on your bed and your guitar?
Oh, yeah. That came about because originally he'd asked if I would remix a track that Youth had originally recorded, because he had this side project in the 90s called The Fireman. So he would record all kinds of instrumental projects where he would play every instrument. And it was kind of an experimental thing that he did, and Youth was producing it. And there was one of the tracks, and I can't even remember the name of it now, but he asked me if I'd do a remix of that track. And so I said, sure. I mean, at the time, it was quite funny because I would accept doing these sorts of things. I had a really simplistic setup in a tiny bedroom that I shared this flat with Sanjeev Bhaskar, with a couple of other friends. We each had our rooms, and that was it. And we had one shared bathroom. I think there were about 5 or 6 of us living there. And it was a very studenty lifestyle. So anyway, I had my computer and I had some keyboards and so on. So I thought, yeah, I can mix a Paul McCartney track here. And then I get a call from him one morning saying that he was going to come round to see me. I was just flabbergasted. I was like, Paul McCartney wants to come here to this flat. It was student digs almost. And so I remember all of us rushing around, clearing up cardboard boxes that were kind of sitting around, had been sitting around for ages. It was not the most savoury place to have lived. And he walked in and he just said, oh, I used to live in a place like this. And he said, I wrote a track called Scrambled Eggs in a place very similar to this. And he said, let me play it to you. And actually since then, because Mary McCartney is a good friend now, and she's confirmed, she was saying, oh, yes, because I was talking to her about it. And she said, yes, he did. And it's interesting getting it from her perspective as well. But it was bizarre because he then played Yesterday on my guitar, which is what Yesterday
Scrambled
was originally called, Scrambled Eggs, and sung that. And it was fascinating because I could see he's left-handed, so he's playing a right-handed guitar. But to see him play and sing, he's very down to earth, very humble, very witty, very friendly, and very open. It's interesting now because I think people can see that because people watch Get Back, the documentary series. I don't think people really knew what he was like until they saw that, and they go, oh, he's the kind of person who really drove a lot of this. He's incredibly creative and interesting. Later on, I went on to collaborate with him on a track on one of my albums on London Undersound. I went to his ill-fated wedding to Heather Mills in Ireland, where I had a date. I was supposed to take somebody on a date. So for the first date that I took her on was to take her over to Paul McCartney's wedding in Ireland.
That's quite impressive.
It's a pretty surreal kind of first date. Yeah, I remember that vividly. It was actually a really lovely wedding. And I got on very well. I've seen Heather Mills a few times since all of that. He's a really nice person, as is Paul. I mean, unfortunately, and part of the thing about that track on London Undersound was that he was saying that the media had created this thing that wasn't so bad. They have no animosity now, from what I've seen. They're both very decent people, actually.
On top of all of this, you've written scores for over 60.
I think it's about 80 now.
It's 80.
Yeah.
80
like
films.
Yeah,
and that's not even
80
talking
films
about
and
television.
TV series,
Okay.
I'd say. Yeah.
We talked about Blindsight before we switched the recorder on, but Midnight's Children, you scored that. Breathe, which was with Andrew Garfield and Claire Foy. Mowgli, The Legend of the Jungle, which I watched last week. It's just a beautiful film, and I love the theme tune, Change. I've been listening on repeat, so I wake up in the morning hearing it and go to bed because now it's in my head. It's
that's nice.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And What's Love Got to Do with It? I also watched with Lily James, Shazad Latif, and Emma Thompson. Lovely film. I had a call with Paul Brusek, president of Warner Brothers Pictures Music. And he's a former guest.
Oh, I
and
didn't
he
know
said
that.
He'd had dinner with you a few weeks back, and he said various descriptions that he used of you: genius, super creative, friend.
He's a lovely guy.
And he said he had a question for you. When he says he thinks of film in 3 acts. So he said, I always think of, if I can crack the music, I go to the end of the second, beginning of the third. And then if I can crack the music that happens then, it will then filter out, and then I can work out what's going to happen for the rest of it. But he said, I spoke to Anne Dudley, who's the composer for well, lots of things. American History X was one of them. And when he told her, she said that was a horrible idea. She just goes from the beginning and works through to the end. But he said, with your law, accountancy, mathematical background, he said, I bet Nitin's really analytical about it. So how do you work your way into a film?
So the first thing I try and do is find the theme of everything, find an overture, basically, because I think you can pull out strands of narrative and ideas from that. But that means really looking at the whole thing.
So do you typically get the film when it's done and then, or are you seeing how it's going?
Script
It's
stage.
the script, okay.
Well, I mean, I'm working on a big one with Paul at the moment.
Yes, he told me. Am I allowed
Okay.
to mention it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm about to work on that, which is a very big one. Everyone works differently. So that's how I would do it. For example, the silent movies that I did, I scored 3 silent movies for the BFI. So I scored You Got to Know You Mate and for the London Symphony Orchestra. So that was interesting because I was acting as a director as well as a composer in a way, in that I was telling myself what those scenes needed. And so I was trying to find my own way of creating narrative structure in the music rather than bouncing off a director. So that's how I would approach things. I'd create an overture and then pull things out of that, work them to serve different scenes. However, every director is different. I mean, Mira Nair with The Namesake, who's Zoran Memdani's mother.
Oh, okay.
So, when I scored that for her, actually, she contacted me just this morning. When I scored that, which is a brilliant book from Jhumpa Lahiri, that was a great experience because, again, the way she thinks about narrative is so different from, say, Andy Serkis. And Andy Serkis is very immersive from the beginning. So he'll want me to be on set and be there for the shoot and live and breathe the whole experience with him, which I love. I think it's fantastic. But everyone's different. So you can be brought in at the tail end of everything, or you can be brought in from the script stage, as I am with this current project that I can't talk about yet. Every single director has their own approach. And so you have to be adaptable enough to be able to go with that.
You've done lots of collaborations with Andy Serkis. How did you come across each other?
Oh, well, years ago, I was working for the Women's Playhouse Trust. I was writing the music for a play called The Rover. He was playing one of the characters and we got on very well then, but then we didn't stay in touch. And then many years later, he asked if I would write the music for a video game that he was doing the motion capture work on, which is called Heavenly Sword. And then I did another one with him called Enslaved with Alex Garland, who actually had written it. We got on very well. And then Breathe happened and Mowgli and now this next project, which is fantastic. So all of that has been wonderful. I was going to say, I guess one of the big things about film and scoring for film is that I've always loved reading. I've always loved literature and great stories. What was lovely was being asked to be a Booker Prize judge last year. I was at the Booker Prize last night.
I saw on Instagram, I saw you there being photographed.
And that was wonderful, actually, because reading 156 books in 7 months was...
That's a big ask.
Yeah, but it was exciting and I really enjoyed it. I'm just about to be made a visiting fellow at Oxford University for the new Schwartzman Centre. I'm working with Anthony Gormley and Mary McCartney and Samantha Harvey, and I'm writing an oratorio and 6 chamber pieces for that, which I think is very exciting and interesting to me. My love of literature started very young. I loved reading, but I fell out of love with fiction for many years. I would still read scripts and write music for scripts, but I think I associated that with work. And interestingly, I got much more into maths and physics than reading fiction. So I spent a lot of time reading maths and physics books. And then suddenly to have this tsunami of fiction come at me last year and to engage with that was an incredible pleasure. I really enjoyed it, every moment of it. When I met the authors at last year's Booker Prize, it felt like I was meeting rock stars. It's incredible because people don't realise...
Well, I guess you are, and you're in their own way.
Well, you've been in their minds and they've been in yours. It's so interesting because it's like you've got inside everything that they feel or think about a particular world that they've created. They've created worlds for you to explore. And I was doing that every day for 7 months, which I thought was a very powerful experience as well.
You're a multi-instrumentalist, including flamenco guitarist and a classical jazz pianist. You've written for and conducted many orchestras. London Symphony Orchestra's won, Singapore Festival Orchestra, also for theatre, for ballet, for which you've won awards. You had your own BBC Two series, Nitin Sawhney Spins the Globe. I saw a clip of it yesterday. And one of the things you did was you'd have a guest on the show and you would write something together and perform it by the end of the show.
The day, yeah. That was the challenge for people coming in. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that experience. And everyone rose to it and everyone loved it.
You didn't have any days where you didn't come up with anything?
No. Whatever you did, whatever we came up with, we would have to put that on the show. That was what I really loved about the experience of doing it.
What was your most hilarious or catastrophic moment? Guy Fletcher, who was a guest on the show, they were performing and there was pouring rain and they could see the roof sagging more and more and more. Then eventually it just collapsed on top of, and I can't remember which band member it was, which was hilarious for him because it wasn't him, but not so good for them.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's loads of things. I remember when I was in Australia, I think it was at Sydney Opera House actually. Well, I had this percussion instrument which is called a hand sonic. Basically, I would smack it as hard as I could because I was playing drum and bass groove on it, but I would whack the kick and the snare really hard. We're all getting into what's going on. And the whole thing just collapsed because I smacked it so hard onto my keyboard. The keyboard fell over. Everything collapsed onto my legs. And I was standing up. My knees were in agony because I'd smashed the whole thing onto my knees. I was like, oh my God. And it was just pandemonium. And everything just stopped dead. I mean, which has happened a few times, actually. For example, shortly after the earthquakes in Turkey, in Istanbul, I remember there was lots of power cuts. This happened also in Singapore. There'd be power cuts in these places where you'd be in the middle of something. In Singapore, I was DJing and I had to pick it up again, but I got everyone clapping to kind of keep the vibe going, and then it came back. And it was the same thing as we did in Turkey and Istanbul, just keeping the crowd dancing and clapping, because even though the power had been cut, they could still hear drums. So we just kind of kept everything
But that's very, very clever to kind of just be able to keep it going.
Or Glastonbury, when my keyboard, because you have no time to plug everything in. I mean, literally, it's a total panic getting everything plugged in and then performing. It's like, go, got to do it now. I remember one Glastonbury gig where the keyboard wasn't working at all. And then, fantastically, the Indian classical singer who I'd been working with, Devinder, revealed that he's an amazing stand-up comic. He started doing all this and just kept the crowd, just while I was trying to get everything sorted out. I had no idea he could do that, but he just kept the crowd laughing all the way through, and then we got back into it.
More than Sting, I would love to have met Nelson Mandela. You mentioned meeting him.
Amazing.
What was that like?
Well, it was a deeply spiritual experience for me because I just read the last page of Long Walk to Freedom, his autobiography, in his garden. I got there, literally, I knew I had a few pages to go. I was just frantically getting through it in the car on the way there. I thought, I have to get to the end of this book. I literally got to the last page, finished it. I think he says we're free to be free. I can't remember what the last line is. There's something powerful at the end. And then I'm like, wow. And I just walk in, straight in. And I knew he'd been a boxer when he was younger and he'd been a lawyer. And I'm looking at this guy and thinking, oh, yeah, I can see. And it's quite interesting when you meet somebody who's a historical, incredibly well-known figure like that. I had the same experience with Paul McCartney. When he was talking about playing in the Cavern, he started chatting about that. And I'm thinking, I know all about this. And I know all about your history with John Lennon. And yeah, you're a total stranger. It was the same thing with Nelson Mandela, where he'd be talking about his history and the Bantu Education Act and things like that. And I was like, I know all about this. I've just read the book. I know everything about you. And it's so powerful to meet these people. And that's what I mean about the booker, meeting the authors.
Yeah, you invested so much time.
Yeah.
And did he rise up? Is it your expectation?
Absolutely. His PA came into the room while I was interviewing him and said, Madiba, which is what they called him, the president is on the phone to speak to you. And he looked at me and just said, how many more questions have you got? And I said, 2 or 3. And he said, could you ask the president to call me back in 10 minutes? And I was like, you just put the president off and just speak to them. I don't know if it was the president of South Africa or it was the president of somewhere else, but you just put off a president to speak to someone you'd never met before. And that's what moved me, was because you'll remember, if you've read the book, that is in Riviera, he said, I stand for the struggle of all people, not just Black South Africans. So I remember that moment, I thought, oh my God, he's the real deal. He's somebody who actually genuinely is an egalitarian. He sees everyone as of equal worth. He didn't say, no, I've got to speak to the president now. He said, no, I'm talking to this guy. When I finish, I'll talk to him. So I thought he was very inspiring in that moment, which I don't think he even realised how moved I was by that.
Well, it's incredibly special. As I was researching you, I feel a bit like you as usual, Nelson Mandela, because I have spent all this time listening to your amazing, amazing music, and it blows my mind how varied it is as well. Because most people stick on their lane, whereas you are on every lane. I was thinking, oh, we've got lots in common because I love maths, and you went to this maths school, and me saying that we have music in common is a bit like someone mastering their 2 times table and telling that to Einstein. But also I had heart issues. I had heart surgery a couple of years ago. I have a repaired valve. I typically talk about a low point in a guest's journey, and I wondered if that might have been yours, or one of yours.
It should have been, shouldn't it? However, I remember feeling quite happy throughout the whole thing because I was on morphine pretty much the whole way through it. I mean, the actual heart attack was pretty horrific. It feels like you've got 200 kilogram weight on your chest, and I passed out. I had my face covered in glass and glass shards and everything, and then I was rushed to hospital, get to hospital, and I'm operated on. And I'm still awake.
And you're still awake?
Yes, I was still awake. So they put the stent in. They operate through your wrist. So I'm fully awake during this whole thing, watching them operate on the screen. Yeah, I remember saying to the doctor, did you just clear my artery? Did you just unclog it? And they said, yeah, we just literally did that. I said, I felt you did. It's amazing. I feel fantastic. So I wrote for the Hadley Orchestra. Actually, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra are going to perform it in a couple of weeks. I wrote it in 3 movements. It's called Heart Suite. The second movement is called Morphine and Memories, which is when I was in the ambulance. It was very trippy. I was just high, basically, on morphine, and I found everything hilarious. The whole time I was just laughing, pretty much all the way through. And even when I was recovering, I didn't feel down. I realised I'm not afraid of death.
It's actually a really lovely thing to know.
Yes, and that's what it was. I think I thought, you know what, it's okay. If that happens, it's okay. I actually have had a life that I've really enjoyed. So I thought, it's okay if that happens. I've got nothing to complain about, really. And it was very liberating in every way. So I think that's left me in a perpetual Zen state, I think, since that, which has been great. So everything feels like a bonus. I think, oh, well, I didn't die then, and I'm here, and this is great. Every moment is wonderful. I had a really interesting conversation with Imogen Heap a few months ago, and I was at her place, and she was playing me some music. And it was very powerful because I'd written some stuff about consciousness and about how I feel. Interestingly, they talked about this on White Lotus, which I didn't know they had until somebody pointed out. But I say we're like spray on an ocean wave. We have our moment in the sunlight, and then we return to the wave, and that returns to the ocean. And that's what universal consciousness is. I remember talking about this, and then Imogen Heap said she felt the same way. And then she played me this piece of music. And she said, I've been working on this one piece of music for 4 years. It's just about 3 or 4 minutes long. And she played it to me. And I said, that's the last piece of music I want to hear before I die. She said, I know, it is that, isn't it? I said, you've created that, haven't you? And she said, that's what I set out to do. I thought it was the most incredible thing.
Where is it?
I don't know what she's doing with it. It was very beautiful and very powerful. It felt like being on the precipice of death. There's not much music that I've heard that I could think of that actually captures that. It's very interesting being in that twilight world, or feeling like you are in that world, because I had an awareness that I could die, because the doctors were telling me as well. They said, we've got to be honest with you, you may not survive this operation. The paramedics in the ambulance said, we're fighting to save your life at the moment. They were telling me all this as it was happening. I was tripped out anyway on morphine. All the pictures of me that I look at are me smiling, even with all the glass shards in my face. Arif, who came to visit me with my thumb up, grinning.
Well, gosh, I could talk to you forever. I read this quote recently, and actually it's very fitting, that music is life. That's why hearts have beats. It's been such a treat.
And how are you now, your heart?
Totally fine. And you look really well.
I've always trained. I mean, it was a genetic thing. I did triathlons and I was a kickboxer. I've always done still do lots and lots of pull-ups and things, and I like exercise. So it was very odd to me that happened, but it did. And when it did, then after that, I'm fine because there's nothing wrong with my heart. It was just the arteries, and that runs in our family.
And
I've got 3 stents, and that should be it, really.
Well, that is great news. Thank you so much for coming and doing this today. I loved it. And I've loved listening to your music and watching the films that you've scored.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to all at the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.